Good morning. So I thought I would show you today the transition of the garden from spring to summer, because this is obviously a tiny space, and that's where what it was designed for and what it is right now are absolutely two different things. So this garden is part of a terrace. We live up a hill opposite what was an old mine, so this would have been a miner's cottage, which seems bizarre considering it's in the middle of Bristol, but it's in the middle of Bristol now. At some point it would very much not have been in the middle of Bristol, and it would have been you know, out in the countryside, because we are 4 or 5 miles actually outside the centre. So you know, what's the centre of a city now was not designed to be the centre of a city. Underneath here is there's no soil other than the compost that I've dropped, and I think it's really important to look at what this garden would have been, this space would have been designed for. It would have been, you know, there's every chance that this house was designed for multiple occupancy, that this would have been a space to wash your get your clothes dry, to, you know, put things in, to store stuff, but it was certainly never meant to look like this. And so with that in mind, and with the fact that most of the people who had come into the city would probably have come into the city because they'd lost their land had been enclosed by landowners, and suddenly they had to come into the city to find work to survive. For me, it's really important that actually this is a beautiful space. It shows what can be done, and that it speaks to food, because A, food is what I'm all about in terms of growing, but B, it's a really political statement to say I can grow food in the back of a miner's cottage. So what have we got? So this half will always be the kind of herbaceous half, and if we just quiet for a minute, there's an amazing amount of buzzing going on. Beautiful bee up there. I mean, they're everywhere. But I will be putting things like chard and kale into that, because I think it's really important that we have mixed polycultures. A few people have said to me, oh my goodness, Sarah, you've got willow herb, didn't you mean to pull that out? No. But then this side is the more productive side. So it's quite difficult to find varieties of things that will cope with pots to full size, but it's just about not being greedy and not planting 25 different plants of one species and just experimenting. So we have squashes, Japanese ginger, we have perennial wheat, which is just starting to do its thing and is so beautiful. And I'm growing that as part of a bit of an experiment with some other wheat growers, just to see how it does in the city. Lemon verbena, because is it even a garden without lemon verbena? And then we have perennial kale, a courgette, Oaxacan green sweet corn. Behind there's angelica with some strawberries in that pot, raspberries which have now sadly gone, and then we've got beans. Now, you know, people think beans are all 25 feet tall and need loads of space, but actually if you just put 2 plants in a pot, they will grow beautifully, and they're starting to flower, which is wonderful to see. Pots of herbs, lots of other herbs. This is licorice mint, which is very pretty when it comes into flower. So you can see that it's absolutely possible to grow food in this tiny space. Of course it is. Why would it, you know, why would it not be? But when this, I don't know where I was going with that. And then I have here, so this is really interesting. I got these from the Bristol Seed Swap a couple of years ago. They're called cranberry beans. If you Google cranberry beans, it comes up with borlotti beans, but they most emphatically are not borlotti beans. They were big, round, proper spherical, deep purple seeds. So I'm hoping that I can get a decent crop from them, although you can see the slugs have had a good go, just so that I can save the seeds and we can see what they are. So that's it really. That's the more productive side of the garden. With meadow sweet and white campion. Because why would you not? You know, I just think it's really important, and it's part of what makes this garden. It's part of what makes it my garden. You know, that it speaks of food, and it speaks of what this space wasn't designed for, and yet what this space is very much being used for. So I guess it's just a reminder really, it doesn't matter how tiny your space, or even if you haven't actually got any, we can all grow some food. And just as a final thought, most of this lot isn't actually being, this is a bit ridiculous, but you'll get it, most of this lot, certainly the Oaxacan green corn, the cranberry beans, possibly the borlotti beans, one of these is a dwarf borlotti bean, etc, aren't really being grown to eat, they're being grown for seed saving. And that's another thing that's really great in this space, because it's a tiny space, so you won't get, it won't get sudden, you know, they won't mix themselves up too much if you only grow one variety. Now the other thing that I always grow lots of, excuse the mess, just pointing out nobody's garden's perfect, this is an area I never show you because it's really the area that we do propagation for Edible Bristol, but this at this time of year becomes tomato heaven. So 6 or 7 different varieties of tomato, all from real seeds or Simpson seeds, the chilies that I grew and that you might remember me potting on in the late spring, chilies starting to come. Tomatoes starting, and this is a whole load of stuff that will be going out for Edible Bristol. So yeah, so I think it's just important, you know, all this lot is edible, well, most of it. I wouldn't eat the Rebecca. Yeah, so that's just all I wanted to say really. Doesn't matter how tiny your garden is, you can absolutely still grow food.